why are we, you could say, so aggressive or positive for now that these changes will really happen and we will see that scaling, which we are talking about. It's mostly that we think three things are coming together.
Yeah.
Right? So we say technology, consumer needs, and regulation. Those now coming in the space of mobility together, and this will drive exactly this industrialization or the scale up, right, from those innovations, which you were talking about, right, which are partially 100 years old or even more. But back then, you did not have those three things coming together, which we have now.
Welcome to the Mobility Innovators Podcast.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Mobility Innovators Podcast. I'm your host, Jaspal Singh. Mobility Innovators Podcast invite key innovators in the transportation and logistics sector to share their experience and future forecasts. In this episode, we'll be discussing the future of mobility and key trend in mobility and automotive sector. Our today's guest is a partner and co-leader of the McKinsey Center for Future Mobility, focusing on strategic questions about the several disruptive trends affecting the mobility industry, including the connected car, autonomous driving, electrification, and shared mobility. The McKinsey Center for Future Mobility is the arm of McKinsey & Company, focusing on future mobility scenario in many forms: autonomous driving, e-mobility, shared mobility, and many more. Our guest started his career with McKinsey in 2003 and working for more than 19 years in the organization in different roles. Some of his key research projects include Automotive Revolution 2030, Future of Mobility, and Monetizing Car Data. I'm so happy to welcome Dr. Timo Möller, partner and co-leader at McKinsey Center for Future Mobility. Now it's time to listen and learn. Hello, Timo. It's great to have you on the show and learn from your experience.
Hello, Jaspal. Great to have me.
Great. So today I'll be spending time getting to know more about you, your work at McKinsey Center for Future Mobility, and your thought on innovation in the mobility sector. But to begin with, I would like to ask you to share some interesting fact about your career that are not on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So maybe we can start with my family life. So I'm married, have three kids, relatively small, 3 to 10 years old. So basically, with that, I have not a lot of room for hobbies anymore. I do still a lot running, right? So that's my way to get a free mind and also get quite some good ideas while I'm running.
Oh, yeah.
But apart from that, to be honest, mostly my life is with mobility and with my family. So those two themes are going throughout my life at the moment, at least.
That's a good combination, family and mobility. And I can imagine I have 2 young kids, and it's you have not a lot of room to do anything else. But great to learn about this, and I know you are very passionate about mobility and doing a lot of great work. So actually, you did your master in mechanical engineering and management from Technical University of Dartmouth. And after your college, you straight away joined McKinsey & Company and continue to work in the same organization for more than 21 years now. So I'm really curious to know what did attract you to join a consulting firm and motivated to stay there for so long, because generally people change career. And another important point, because you started in 2003 and we are in 2022, how do you see the role of consulting has changed in last 2 decades?
Yeah. Let me start with the question on why consulting and why I ended up there. And it was not truly a plan back then. It just happened somehow. So at school I liked natural sciences, mathematics, right? So that was also my passion, right? And I thought about, okay, when now going to university, what do I do with that? And then I wanted to do something practical, so it was not theory. So that's why I ended up with engineering. That was not then too far away from that. And I said maybe some management on top of that is not too bad if you want to find a job later on. And so I studied, right, without having clear goal what I want to do with that. And then, so at the end, then came closer and closer, and I still didn't know what to do. And then for, let's say, for whatever reason, I ended up sitting in a, let's say, event from a consulting firm. It actually was not even McKinsey, but a different one.
Okay.
But then I realized, hey, what those guys are doing isn't too bad, right? So they do a lot of innovative and also tech-related stuff, but they then think through what you can do with real life or in real life with their technology, right? And you see different companies, different players, also a global thing. So I said, why don't I join for something like 2-3 years, the typical thing? And then, and then I found out that it's not too bad, right? I really liked it. I spent the first, let's say, good half of my career mostly in automotive product development. So I did a lot of work on cars and car projects and helped clients to think through their portfolio strategy and stuff. And then I would say the turbocharger in the good old world was then when we made the decision at McKinsey to found the McKinsey Center of Future Mobility. And I was the lucky person, with the employee number 001 to build the whole thing. And since then, the mobility disruptions really became my passion, and this was really another unlock for my career also at McKinsey, right? The topic itself, but also the space, which is so dynamic and has so much opportunities. This is now only 7 years ago. So there's a lot more to come, and I'm super passionate still in that space. On your question, and this is an interesting one, which I haven't reflected on for quite a bit, right? What is now, is there anything different between doing strategic management consulting back in 2003 and today? And yes, there is obviously if I just look in my space now, the content has changed. So you are optimizing, I don't know, a diesel engine, and you are thinking about what kind of the shape of a new car could look like, right? But it actually is the same car, right? But just the shape is a little bit different. To now completely new business models, new consumer needs, new technology. So basically, let's say the space has changed. Fundamentally, we are working on as a firm, but also the way we work on it. Still back then, I remember we were still mostly a gang of smart people, and you enter a client side, there was a task defined in a certain project, and you just did it mostly with your brain, and you did some research, and then you draw conclusions from that. So today we have, I'm leading the center, right? And we have a network now of more than 300 people who are spending most of their time, if not all, like in my case, on mobility disruptions, and became really expert in certain fields. But we also have built what we call assets, mostly market models. We are tearing down vehicles. We have experience centers, etc. So today we bring own IP, own things to the table when we work with clients, right? And those are crucial for our client work. And we are still hopefully relatively smart people, but it's much more than that. So we are bringing something into a project which creates a jump start typically in a situation, and it's not this free flow just brainstorming and problem solving mode anymore, which we had back then. So it's quite differently, to be honest, than back then. And our people are much more, let's say, expertise driven than 20 years back.
No, that's a great point, and I fully agree with you. Given the data and technology available now, so the consulting has changed. So you can't just tell just a strategic plan to the client and say, okay, our job is done. But as a consultant now, you need to figure out how to make it done. And then you have to figure out through the data and some market analysis and all, not just like a theory, but also giving some practical footprint and all. And I really like your point when you said like the Center for Mobility is just 7 years old and a lot of things have changed in 7 years. But I think next 7 years will be much more exciting. And probably when we'll have conversation again in 2030, you will have a different outlook.
Yeah, you'll smile. We had back then in 2015, we did screen the technology trends in, back then still we said automotive. And we started to prioritize, right, in that good old matrix from likelihood and impact, those trends. I think we had 20 or so.
Yeah.
And we carved out the ACEs as the 4 most important trends. But back then it was not clear, and it is only 7 years ago, that it's the ACEs we are talking about. I mean, we don't talk about ACEs anymore because it's anyway clear.
Yeah.
But only 7 years back, we still did an exercise to say what are now the most impactful trends which we are seeing, and this is so, let's say, quickly moving the whole space. And I'm also with you. You said, hey, the next 7 years will probably have even another, let's say, acceleration and speed. That's true. I mean, we the last 7 years were mostly about understanding, piloting,
Yeah.
and maybe coming up with new business models. Now it's about, the next 7 years are fully about scaling,
Yeah.
and industrialization in some areas. And this will be very different, let's say, challenges to solve than the last 7 years, where it was mostly about tech and maybe some business ideas, but now it's about scaling, and this is very, very different. So it will stay exciting, and I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, great. In fact, you did author one of the compendium in 2020, and it was The Future of Mobility at Your Doorstep. And basically you highlighted some key changes in the mobility sector. And in that report, I saw there was like record investment happen in last 10 years, like big investment happen in electric, autonomous, and shared mobility space. And we see a lot of big company. But sometimes if I look back in the mirror, these trends are not new. I mean, we had first electric vehicle in 1900. We have first prototype flying car in 1947, which was called Convair Model 118. We had first autonomous car built by Carnegie Mellon University in 1980s. So these trends are not new, electric or autonomous or urban air mobility. Why do you think things are different now? And what one thing as a consultant, I know you must be doing a lot of work for the client. What is your prediction for 2035? Like you feel 35, we'll be living in that sci-fi world when the car flying around us and we are sleeping in the car and taking us anywhere. What's your prediction for 2035? Yeah,
or we don't even use mobility at all because we are living in the metaverse, right? And there is no need for mobility anymore.
Yeah.
No, let's go step by step. Why are we, you could say, so aggressive or positive for now that these changes will really happen, and we will see that scaling, which we are talking about? It's mostly that we think 3 things are coming together. Right?
Yeah.
So we say technology, consumer needs, and regulation. Those now coming in the space of mobility together, and this will drive exactly this industrialization or the scale up, right, from those innovations, which you were talking about, right, which are partially 100 years old or even more. But back then, you did not have those 3 things coming together, which we have now, and maybe we can go, let's say, a little bit step by step on those 3 things. So on technology, we have massive advancements across the different trends, right? So if you just think of the computing power you can have today in a car, And the network or connectivity you have today in the car, mostly around the world even, it was incredible still probably 10 years ago only. And if you want to do something like autonomous driving, you need to process a lot of data in a very short period of time. And we have now reached, seems like we have reached a point where it's feasible. But we needed that unlock in those base technology. Also artificial intelligence is another one. We needed that to be able to do that, or think of the advancements which we have done in the battery field, just getting costs down. Right? If you would still have, let's say, a situation where you pay for the kilowatt hour €1,000 or $1,000, then electric vehicles, purely electric vehicles, wouldn't be feasible, right? And nobody could pay for them. But the innovations in the lithium-ion batteries helped kind of to unlock now, a battery pack, which is some sort of affordable. It's still expensive, but it's somehow feasible. So technology, regulation. I think that you need to split that in two levels, right? So you have the national regulation, which is mostly looking at CO2 emission these days, or at least that's a big focus area. And you have those local city regulation, right? We have now, it seems like, a society, the willingness to do something about the climate crisis, at least to do something about it. And so there's now in a region like Europe, where I'm living, but also in other regions, there's now the wish from the society, but then also translated into regulation to force down CO2 emissions, right? And this is also something which you did not have in the 1900s. It's the same if you go to the local level. There is more often, so on cities, it's not so much CO2 only. It's the criteria for having mostly less cars and then electric cars, but also new modes of transport is driven just by the, let's say, making the system work again. So avoiding traffic jams, so increasing traffic flow, increasing the quality of mobility, increasing also the affordability of mobility. And sustainability obviously also plays a role. And so cities have started to take measures, right, and allow only bus to certain districts in the city, or even mandate that cars are completely out in certain areas of the city. So cities have started with regulation, and if you listen to them a little bit more closely, this is only the beginning, right? So there's huge plans. I think Europe also here is a little bit. You can see that shift strongest already. In the minds of the city administrators or the mayors, that they really want to do something, and so that's the ingredient two, right? Regulation. And the third one is consumer adoption. I mean, to be honest, there I'm not so sure if we have. So if there the change is biggest, but I think the others, the disruption is more even to be seen. But the consumers, that's what we can see, are very open to all of that. So meaning, if you ask the younger generations now, how important for you is to have a car, even in emerging markets like China, where the car was always a status symbol for the people to show that you have achieved something and you can now afford a car. Even there, I mean, it's still there, it's not gone, but even this let's say level of status symbol is shrinking. And in let's say more developed markets, it's anyway seeable. For years now, we see a decrease of people to do driver's licenses, and also in our surveys, right? You see a lot of openness to those different modes, and so the consumers are I would say just very, very open, seems like, for all those changes, and do see the positive sides of those changes. And yeah, bringing it all together makes us confident that we're gonna see that those changes. And yeah, and on your question on 2035, right? We do believe we will see significant changes in the next 13 years now.
Okay.
Of those, let's say, scaling trends. But this is a very heterogeneous and let's say granularly to be answered question. There will not be that mobility solution across the world. I do believe from the starting points, from the very different starting points, cities across the world will need different solutions, right? You have a relatively good public transportation system in Europe, in some Asian countries even better. You have a pretty bad one in the US, right? And just looking at that, the solutions need to look different because you have a different backbone in those countries. And so there I think it will depend on the city and the answer, and then there's also kind of a different willingness of, again, the population there, and also the administrators there, organization to push for that shift. And there is cities in Europe who are pretty, let's say, openly saying we want to get rid of cars completely. In the next 8 to 12, 13 years, so towards 2035, and want to replace that by a functioning public transport system, which is then complemented by robo shuttles and micromobility. And yeah, you have those, but you also have others who are way more conservative, right? Who haven't talked about it. And so I do believe we will see different, let's say, very different mixtures by 2035. We will see cities which are car-free. I strongly believe that. And we will see others which may not even look too different from today.
Oh, great. No, I loved your first about your framework. And I fully agree with you. You know, what we didn't have earlier was regulation. People were not open for new experiment, and the customer need was not there. Like in US, you rightly mentioned about it's very bad. The public transport system is not fully developed here. But at the same time, they are facing challenge to find the drivers for the buses. So it actually push now for autonomous buses. So need for having vehicle with some kind of a technology so that they can drive at least the shuttle route or the night trips or the trip within a closed boundary, like an airport trip. So you can do with the shuttle bus. So there is a strong need now, so which will push the technology. And all the country has a different starting line. I mean, I work with a lot of these European cities, and I know it's much advanced. So probably they don't need to build another layer of these different transit system or robo taxi and all, because the public transport is really good. What they need to do is connect those connection and provide some services in the night and all. No, I love your point, and I fully agree with you. Now, one of the point you mentioned about that every country will be different in terms of growth and all, and I think that will be true for electric vehicle as well. And McKinsey actually published a very good report with the forecast for battery electric vehicle and plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, and projected that they will have 47 million electric vehicle by 2030. So it's not very far away, like just 8 years. But I agree with you. Now it's a time for acceleration, and we'll see a big acceleration, because right now we have 3-4 million vehicle produced every year, and it will go up to 47 million. And also, you rightly highlighted, probably some country will take a lead, like Europe, North America, China, which will kind of these three geography will contribute 55% of new production vehicle, electric and new energy vehicle. But at the same time, I feel it's a huge number. If you look at now and say 47 million by 2030, it's look like a huge number. One reason is from consumer side, but other is like you need to have these automotive player or manufacturer be ready for that big change.
Yeah.
And you're working with these manufacturers. They are very slow to move. They are in this industry for so long, so it's very hard to move them. So how do you see the path for electrification shifting to this low emission vehicle look like? Do you think there'll be a lot of bumpy rides, or it will be quite smooth, or now it will be like everybody go crazy and shift? And also one point which you mentioned earlier is that it's not only the vehicles are changing, but the business model around the vehicle changing.
Mm-hmm.
So will this electrification movement kick in new business model and new era for whole automotive industry? And I like what you said, like now we call them a mobility player rather than saying automotive player. So how this whole business model will change?
Yeah. I think this is not an easy one, for sure not. It's the biggest transformation which the automotive industry has seen in since inception.
Yeah.
Right. And this is for sure quite challenging. If you just look at, let's say, the value chain which stands behind the battery, this alone is a massive shift. We are building multi-billion industries in Europe only to just for on the battery, nothing else.
Yeah.
Right, which is not existing at the moment. And so this is a huge task. Still, we think it must happen. So there is just no alternative. And the consumers are open to it, and not only open, but they are more and more getting demanding. So we often talk, if I stay for a moment with the consumer, we often talked back then in 2015, right? So at the beginning, the electrification from a consumer or from an industry perspective will be a push situation. So the regulator needs to push in those vehicles with regulation, with incentives or whatever. Yeah. But at a certain point, we see a tipping point, and then it's becoming a pull situation, right, where the consumers will pull those vehicles. Now, I would say in Europe, we have had that tipping point where there's still, you need to be able to buy a new car, right, and need to be able to afford a new car. But when you are doing that, you see that the majority of consumers are considering an electric vehicle, a battery electric vehicle.
Yeah.
There is still a supply problem in terms of you maybe don't get the make, I don't know, the number of seats, the design, the brand, whatever, what you are preferring, right? So there's still this massive demand is still not matched by a huge portfolio of vehicles, right? It's already way better than 3 years ago. Yeah. But it's still relatively small. So that's why then some people still decide to go for something else, to go for an ICE or to go for a plug-in hybrid or an hybrid. But there is the demand, right? So, and the other thing, coming back to my framework again, there's the regulation, right? I'm coming back again to Europe, right? There is the clear goal how much we need to have reduced the CO2 emission for the fleet by 2030. Yeah. And otherwise, you need to pay severe fines, right? And you can turn it around as you want. It's more economic to get those vehicles, so those battery electric vehicles out, compared to paying those fines. Yeah. So it's economically smarter to get battery electric vehicles out. Even if you don't earn a lot of money with them, or would theoretically not earn a lot of money with them, it's still better than paying those massive fines and selling ICEs. So there's a forcing device now also from the regulator to make that happen. This is true for Europe, but we have similar things also in other regions of the world. So it must happen, and the industry needs to cope with building a whole new supply chain behind those vehicles. But I mean, as always, I'm optimistic. I think the automotive players have created such a, let's say, great ecosystem, great talent they have, and now they are more and more really closely working with the other industry players in chemicals, in mining, etc., also to make that supply chain work. So it's not an easy ride, as I said at the beginning, but I do believe that it's feasible to make that switch to, I would say, in Europe, but also in China by 2035. I do expect in Europe we must be again regulation, but also in the other areas see fully electrified, let's say, sales in the automotive space. US may be a little bit still some portions of ICEs, but yeah. So that's on your EV question. It's not an easy ride, but we're gonna do it. You are right. It's not only about the car, but it's also about, let's say, the ownership model of the car, and even then also what we so often call the monetization model after the car is in the field.
Yeah.
Right. And this is also a topic where the automotive players, but also other ecosystem players, are really working on. And we have seen for years now that the classical model, I don't know, from the 60s or 70s, you go in a dealership, you buy a car, you put the money on the table, is shrinking by the year. I mean, it moved into leasing then. And those leasing numbers and full leasing, full service leasing is growing since years. So this next step of what we then call subscription models or similar terms is something which is now also around. It's not scaling yet. Again, a topic which is not yet scaling, but where there is from a let's say just consumer point of view, quite some advantages of that. And also this is matching quite nicely with a lot of the, let's say, needs and the demand from the consumers. People don't feel it's cool to own a car anymore, to really own it. They see it also as an obligation, right? So
yeah.
Hey, then it's I don't know, I need to go to maintenance and what do I do if I want to switch the car? I need to sell it and complicate it and all those contracts with insurance. And so more and more, especially the more younger consumers, see that not as something cool to have to own a car, but rather as a burden. So again, we are talking average here, right? So there is still people around it. And so just from a consumer point of view, it's the subscription idea is a good one, and now let's say the real life challenges comes in with that, right? So there's now obviously a big capex which someone needs to own.
Oh, yeah.
You see that consumers typically want to have a new car in a subscription model, right? But you cannot, I mean, just logically, you cannot change your car every 3 months and always get a new car.
Yeah.
So somebody also needs then to take that 3-month-old car, and even the 6-month-old car, and maybe even the 1-year-old car. But typically consumers like to have a new car, right? So this is not cracked yet, right? The subscription thing, but we do believe that let's say subscription we will see, as we have seen leasing will grow, and then also I mean, car sharing, which is then the next level, right? You have a car only by the minute, and not even by the month or by half year, is something where we wouldn't expect now any more major growth, because we come to that later maybe, but which is still then for, let's say, specific use cases, specifically as long as autonomous is not around, can be let's say a complementing element. And will be around for quite some years, we do believe. And so, yes, also the ownership is changing, and then then also say the obligation to earn money with that car in the life cycle. So a lot of, let's say, business model innovations. You're absolutely right.
Well, that's great. In fact, I want to follow up one point which you mentioned about, and I know you did a study on that, data monetization. In the vehicle for the automotive sector. And you must have read recently Volkswagen start saying we will have a heated car or heated seat, but you need to pay subscription charges for that. So if you pay subscription charges, they will activate that feature and you can enjoy. If you don't pay, so, and also I'm seeing a lot of companies are now thinking to become an insurance company as well, as because they will have data about your driving behavior and all. And a lot of these companies which are giving subscription, they will say, okay, we will underwrite insurance for you. So you don't need to take insurance separately. We will do that. What other, interesting use cases you are feeling will come out with this data monetization, how they will make money from this?
Yeah, we see, so making money is in our definition, how we did it is on the one hand side, indeed creating revenue, but it's also saving cost. So we really walked through in our first study already on car data monetization through the whole, let's say, value chain, and that even in the product development, you benefit from having more insights on really consumer needs, and then, for example, you can make easier decisions to avoid developing a certain function when you know nobody's using it, right? And we have functions in vehicles these days which nobody is using.
Yeah.
And then you don't need to develop it, and then you save a hell lot of money if you don't develop something which somebody's not using. So there's this, or think of marketing and sales, right? You have more tailored information to Jaspal and Timo, and you don't do just a TV advertisement thing, which 90% is not interested in. So there's ways also to save cost, but I mean, we all know that the more interesting stuff is those new, let's say, growth opportunities, and we see indeed that it's easier to stay, or it's easier to create a, let's say, an attractive value proposition for a consumer these days if it's relatively close to the car itself. So meaning, you mentioned stuff, right? Insurance, for example. You need an insurance, right? But I think nobody really likes the process this is done today. It also does not, or likes to save money with the car insurance, right? So this is a spot on topic where, with all the data, you can say we are getting, let's say, observed by somebody, and so our driving behavior. But on the other side, this, let's say, observation is creating value, which then can be shared between some companies, but also I will also have a benefit from it as a consumer, right? If I can prove I'm more defensive, and I mean maybe even have fun to drive more defensive and a bit slower, and by that earning points or whatever, and I know every point is worth a certain, let's say, amount of money. That can also make fun, right? And so there's clearly those win-win situations in insurance. Predictive maintenance is another one, right? That you go sooner or later into the workshop and get an exchange. We see that everything around navigation is still a relevant topic, and also kind of really adding new elements and criteria to navigation. Not only kind of the shortest way or the fastest, but also stuff like what's the most, let's say, sustainable way. What's we did a survey back, was in the earliest connectivity survey. We asked for stuff and consumers, and they said, I would love to have a route which is the safest route. Right, so where someone avoids kind of those typical accident crossings, for example, right? Or on the country road where on this country road there happens a lot of accidents, right? I want to have someone telling me, or the navigation system recommending me a different route which is avoiding those critical areas. We were pretty surprised by that, but it's so there's also new ideas around navigation. So typically, and maybe that's my last two thoughts. Typically, it's still the most relevant areas where you really create a new value, where it's not just hey, I have data and I sell this data to somebody or so, or this, I don't know, in-car office idea, which is for some people also creating value, but where at a scale you are really solving a problem for a consumer with just connecting data points and benefit from that, and this benefit you can share across different parties. Yeah. So that's typically what we see. And the other thing which we also should mention, and we came up with this levels of connectivity, is that while many cars are already connected somehow to something, none of those, or only a very few, let's say, vehicles have really enhanced connectivity and ways of an enhanced interaction with the vehicle. So yeah. Think of bigger screens, gesture control, even voice control is working in some vehicles pretty nicely, but in many vehicles pretty badly. And as long as you don't have, let's say, the hardware and software on board, that you really can create a true experience, then you cannot earn money with, I don't know, cinema-like experience if you don't have the hardware and software on board, right? So for those use cases, then virtual chauffeur and all these great ideas, which we also have in there, you need this more advanced hardware and software in the vehicles, which is now slowly getting into the vehicles, but it's for sure not standard yet.
Oh, thanks for sharing. I love your point about navigation, because sometimes when I put a destination, I want to have a more scenic route, like a place where you can have a nice view and you can enjoy the landscape and you can enjoy the drive. So I wish there is the option to select, like you said, safest or more scenic route, and you can drive around that. So quite interesting. Now, my next question is, which you must be getting from a lot of your client, because like you said, electric is not more choice anymore. It has to be done. It's just when it will happen fully and all. But a lot of these companies have a thought, and not only the automotive player, but also the operator is like, whether it's electric or hydrogen or fuel cell, like which area they should invest, because it's not like you create your toolkits and you create your factories around electric vehicle, and 5 years you say, okay, guys, we are done with electric. Now we are moving to hydrogen. So because I spoke to a lot of industry people, and they are not very bullish about hydrogen. They still feel it's 5 to 10 years away before commercialization and all. But what's your prediction when a client come to you, let's say a big automotive company, and say, hey, Timo, should we invest in electric or should we straight away move to hydrogen? What's your answer to them?
So I stay for a moment on the industry level perspective, right? I'm strongly convinced of that we will need both in the whole mobility ecosystem, including also the commercial vehicle side.
Yeah.
And let's say rule of thumb is the heavier the vehicle and the longer the route, or you can say the mileage this vehicle is going per day, and the more unpredictable that route is, the more this goes into hydrogen. The less this is all those criteria, right? The more it's going into purely battery electric vehicles. And with this kind of logic, which is obviously driven by say time to refuel or get energy on board, and also, let's say, range you get with those vehicles with a relatively feasible economical model. This is the underlying root cause, but this will then lead to, let's say, different penetrations in different segments, right? So PES cars to start with, we may, so in our scenarios, right, in a fully decarbonized mobility world, we could imagine that even in the PES car space, something like 5 to 10% points sales, you could say, in 2040 or so, is potentially can make sense if you think of really people who have heavy vehicles, very heavy vehicles, who drive long distances, who want to refuel them quickly. There will be consumers who will then like to have that flexibility, right? But it's let's take the next 10 years, right? We will not see a scale up there. This will be, I mean, we have already vehicles on the road today, right? So there will be some growth, but it's you can say it's even neglectable in the next 10 years, right?
Yeah.
If I go to the other end of the spectrum, right, heavy duty, long haul distance truck, even with an unpredictable route, so not lanes, you go from every day from this logistics center to this logistics center, and you know exactly where you can charge, but you have random routes, right, less than truckload stuff, where you combine stuff even while being already on the road.
Yeah.
And stuff where you don't know where to charge at a depot or whatever. Yeah, it's clear that this is the perfect use case for hydrogen trucks, and we then can believe for those use cases we will see even a penetration of more than 50% of hydrogen or fuel cell electric trucks. Yeah, and then you have the rest in the middle, right? So everything which is urban, regional, right, distribution, I think most of that will be electric. Purely battery electric, right? But yeah, the longer it gets, the heavier the load, the more uncertain the route is. Yeah, we will see hydrogen as a relevant opportunity. Why I'm so convinced of that we see that, and I know the whole story is about efficiency losses.
Yeah.
Yes, that's clear, and we don't have infrastructure at the moment, and we don't have green hydrogen at the moment, and all of that. But just think 5 years back, right, for the electric cars, a lot of that was also not around. So that this is not the point. For me, the key reason why I do believe that hydrogen will play a role in our economies in total, but also in transport, is that I simply don't think that we get all the energy, the green energies, which we need in Europe, but also other regions of the world, like in Japan, certain areas of the US, certain areas of China, that we can all locally produce that. I don't see that. And specifically, I can talk mostly about Europe, right? I mean, we have already paid attention on building wind farms and pushing now again, but we did that already before, PV, so photovoltaic, but it's just too slow, right, to cope with the need for speed of decarbonization. So that means we need to import green energy from somewhere, where it's relatively cheaply cheaply produced, and where it's able to fastly ramp up production.
Yeah.
And then you are getting, if you are looking from a European perspective, then you are immediately getting to either very southern Europe or even into Africa, right? Where you can get, and then you can kind of close the loop with this efficiency analysis, right? Out of the solar cell, you get twice the energy in Africa than you get it in Cologne, where I'm living.
Yeah.
Right. And if I have an efficiency factor of 2 between those 2 generation points, right, and out of the sudden, this funny efficiency analysis looks already different, right, between a battery electric vehicle and a hydrogen electric vehicle. But the core is really that I believe we need to import green energy, and hydrogen is a good mean of transportation for green energy. And then once you have it, right, anyway, around, and we need a system of pipelines and storage, etc. in Europe, once this is around anyway, then you can also use it for heavy duty trucks, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's the simple logic.
No, I agree with you. It's not the question of either or, it's just which category has a which use case. So for smaller vehicle, electric, makes sense. But
Clearly.
heavy dutier and unpredictable route, I agree with you, because you can't have charging everywhere. So unpredictable route. So it makes sense to go for hydrogen. Great. Now, thanks for sharing that, Timo. And now, I work with Uber, and when I was working with Uber, the share mobility things was counted as a death bell to the car industry. So they said the car ownership is over. Now everybody will use shared vehicle, and everywhere we will see shared mobility and all. But that prediction didn't turn true, and we see most of these big companies which are listed on stock exchange now, Uber, Lyft, Grab, and Didi, and other which are not listed, but now they are facing some challenges. So this whole share mobility thing they changed the industry. I would not say it was a hype, because they changed the industry. We see how people are buying their stuff and on-demand delivery, on-demand good, like in Europe. This whole 10-minute delivery was a big hype, and everybody thought now there is no need for shops. Everybody will order in 5 minutes and gone. But nothing is becoming true. So how do you see this market is evolving? And do you see we have already reached a plateau? Like, do you see now share mobility things is over and now we need to think about something new?
No, I don't think we have reached a plateau and this is all gone. What I do believe is that there is still an ingredient which is missing for even bigger scale, and this whole system approach thinking is missing.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is we can achieve only a certain adoption just by consumer pull of those shared mobility services, right? Specifically, if they still have a driver on board, it's also not cheap, right? Like in some very many cases, even compared to owning a car and driving a car, at least a cheap or an older car. And even not kind of compared to other means of transport like public transport or so. By that you would reach a certain plateau. But I'm linking that back now to what I said before, right? Regulation is coming in, specifically local regulation, and there is cities, and we have had the let's say the honor to work with some of those cities developing their future mobility system. You're just forecasting by GDP growth. You are just forecasting what will be the population of a city, what will be their mobility needs, and then you are throwing that into their current mobility system, and you will figure out you are having and I have the number on top of my mind, right? In a metro area like Paris, you have today, let's say, a commuting time, average commuting time across all the people, right, of 28 minutes.
Okay.
And we know it's not really fast. So for those people who are listening to us who have been to Paris, right, if you want to go in the rush hour from A to B with the car, it takes some time. And this 28 hours would go up to something like 38 if we don't do anything in the next 10 years. So this means everybody is then completely stuck, right? This is no option, simply. This you cannot do, and this is purely analytically driven. There's no politics or whatever behind. It's just you see that the systems specifically for those dense urban areas is not working anymore if we just go on like in the last decades. Hence, cities need to change something, and this means you need to get more people in a denser situation, right? So you need to either bring them into public transport, or you need to get them on micro mobility, in a car, in a bike, an e-bike, or a scooter or whatever. Or you need to get them into pooled shared mobility, right? So the shuttle idea, and if you then get the autonomous on top of that, so the robo shuttle, then it's becoming also pretty affordable as a, let's say, pretty much, let's say, replacement. So all three of them public transport, those robo shuttles and the micromobility, putting them all together can replace the car in a city, right? And this will be the unlock, I think. Once the cities decide, either by completely banning cars or limiting them by certain fees, right, which only rich people can afford, or so, then we will see, let's say, the next growth of also shared mobility. But it's important. We solve the problem only if we do it pooled, right? So only the pooling element is I mean, there's other advantages of sharing itself. You don't need the space for the parking vehicles. So there's other advantages, but if we want to increase the traffic flow, we need to pool people in devices.
Yeah, no, I think this reminds me of this. I don't know if you use it, because at McKinsey, probably you don't quote Gartner innovation cycle, which say like you reach to a plateau or you are near the plateau. Now you need another push to move forward, which is, like you said, regulation.
Yeah. And this is a regulation, and then in combination, and then we are coming to that funny term of MaaS, so mobility as a service, right? You then, this system of the, let's say, three big buckets, public transport, robo shuttles, and micromobility.
Yeah,
you need to link all of them, right? So there's then mobility as a service coming in, and if we are honest, in most cities across the world, this is also not yet functioning. So this is then the, let's say, the more or less technology side for that, which is also missing in most situations. But I think the trigger is indeed this, push from the individual city.
And actually another push could be this autonomous vehicle, because there were, like you mentioned this point, most of this shared mobility is with driver, and so it still have a high cost. So if you remove the driver, probably the cost will come down drastically. And there was some study done and which highlighted that the cheap ride will become very cheap. In fact, I don't know if you watch this Tesla AI Day and they demonstrate their self-driving. So it's look very real, like it's soon that autonomous driving will be very real. In parallel, company like Cruise, Waymo, Bedu, Pony AI, they are running commercial robotaxi pilot in different cities and all. So
right.
I think there'll be two different approaches. One will be the self-driving personal vehicle, which Tesla is pushing, and then other will be shared autonomous vehicles. So probably that will be the push for the shared mobility. But my biggest concern, after, like you mentioned, like shared mobility will be popular again, and with autonomous vehicle it will create more space for people. But with more autonomous vehicle, don't you think there will be like more people will travel and they will have more autonomy to travel? So in fact, some people, those who don't need to be on the road, they will be on the road. And I was also talking to some people, and they were saying in future we will have these shops running around. The barber shop will come to your house for haircut. You don't need to go out for coffee, because coffee shop will come in front of wherever you want to meet and all. So it's give a scary situation. So basically, I want to ask you two things. One is, do you think this autonomous vehicle will be reality soon? Like the level 4 autonomy will be possible? And the second biggest question, which I want to ask you, because you highlighted in Paris that the travel time will increase from 28 to 38 minutes. So you need to do something. But with autonomous mobility, probably it will be 48 minutes. I don't know. I mean, I'm just predicting or estimating. But do you think this autonomous mobility will be a solution to our problem, or it will be a new problem for us?
And those are, so the second question is a very interesting one. Let me start with the first one. So we do believe that by the end of this decade, we will see level 4 vehicles running on the streets. For sure not, you have this science fiction picture mentioned before, for sure not all of them. In our more recent, let's say, forecast, we would assume an adoption rate of something like the lower one single-digit numbers of vehicle sales will be truly level 4 autonomous. But we do believe that specifically in the urban case, in the urban context, we will see first fleets running around, maybe even having started to replace completely non-autonomous vehicles and private vehicles in a city. So I could well imagine that we're going to see that scenario, that the one or the other city has decided to ban privately owned vehicles and replace them by my 3 means of transport I was talking about before, including the robo shuttles. So that's on the timeline. We will see in the private space, we will now see a relatively, let's say, aggressive uptake of the levels of autonomy, right? So where we have still currently we still have level 0 vehicle sales in the world. This number will shrink, let's say, relatively rapidly towards the end of the decade to probably something, I don't know, 10% or so. And will be then replaced by level 1, level 2, entry, advanced, and then also what we see already with some selected players, at least traffic jam pilots, level 3, highway pilots. So we will see quite some movement up the ladder, so to say, also in the private space. But the level 4 topic, we do believe is mostly scaling or earliest scaling in the shared space, simply because of the business case again, right? So you can afford higher tech costs in a shared vehicle which is running around 24 hours and replacing a driver, versus you and I would be willing to pay for the private vehicle, which is standing around anyway 99% of the time. So then having an option which costs you 15, 20K, probably the two of us wouldn't take it. So that's the simple reason behind. Now, is autonomous helpful for the mobility transition, or is it rather an enemy, you could say, right? The way you described it. It can be both, actually. So it can worsen the situation as you described it. It makes just let's say cheaper to drive things and people around, and hence there is a risk that autonomous can increase even the size of the problem. But I think the societies are not naive, and also the city regulators are not naive. They will not allow that. They will say, if we now want to have a, let's say, higher traffic flow in cities, we need a certain, let's say, system. This system will consist of, I don't know, 20,000 robo shuttles for my city. And this is pooled, right? I may allow even and say, okay, let's give those guys who really want to spend money also some robo taxis, right? So there's some consultants who want to quickly get from A to B and want to pay an extra. And this might be even a regulated price, which is then really an extra. So you may even have some cities who say that's okay for some people, right? But the massive amount of people we need to move in pooled robo shuttles, and then it's really helpful, right? So then it's because it's then you are increasing again the density of people on the road shuttle, but you still make it very affordable, and you can relatively easily figure out that you are getting pretty close to public transport costs, right, by mile or by kilometer for those shuttles, which then are agile, right, where you can just call it, they are on demand, you call them, the algorithm is kind of optimizing which shuttle is now picking up a certain person, knowing where that person wants to go and where the other person wants to go. So you can make that quite comfortable. Specifically, if you have such a high penetration, when you say, basically, I get all my people in those shuttles, who are not using public transport for those areas which are not connected to public transport. So then if you have a massive flow of people, then this optimization of getting us mostly pretty straight to your destination is feasible, right? And so in that world, robo shuttles and autonomous driving helps. In a world where I just let everything go and let the market do whatever the market wants to do, it may relatively quickly become a challenge.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And the regulators are much more smarter than compared to earlier time. Now they know how the city should shape up and all. And I'm pretty sure you must be working with some of the city to draft these plan already of these scenario building. If everything will be autonomous, how it will be. I'm very curious to see a city which will ban all the personal vehicle and only allow the robo taxi and shuttle and all. I wish we'll have more city. I don't know. Probably it will be in Europe.
I would expect so as well. I mean, we have also some greenfield cities in the world, right? Asia, Middle East, where they at least already today plan for at least certain areas without cars or even completely without cars. But the interesting point will be more about those, say, legacy cities who will be the first one. But there's indeed in Europe, there's quite some mayors who are quite advanced and looking into that. I mean, still, we all now know how it goes. There could be an election, right? And then there may be a new mayor, and this new mayor may have a different perspective on things. But I see, so that the whole thinking, if you go, and you know that as well, right? If you go to a conference with representatives from city governments, everybody is talking about decreasing the let's say modal share of private cars. Everybody, and so there seems to be a, let's say, joint wish from more or less everybody to go in that direction, and so it's only a matter of time. I think that also first cities will follow the plan of having no private cars at all.
No private car. No, that'll be a good example for others to follow. And sometimes seeing is believing. When you see one city has done it, then you get a courage to experiment and do. Now, I recently did a small poll on LinkedIn, and actually I asked people about what they are bullish about future of mobility. And like you mentioned, mobility as a service is still very, very talk about subject. So more than 50% people said, the future of mobility is about mass, about mobility as a service. And they were not very bullish about hydrogen or autonomous vehicle and urban air mobility. And then I went back, I said, okay, people are bullish about mass. Let's see what investors are bullish about. The VCs are bullish about. But VCs are bullish about urban air mobility. They invested $1 billion in last 9 months. VCs are bullish about autonomous vehicle. They again invested $1 billion in that. They are bullish about hydrogen. They invested 280 million, and they invested only 16 million in mass. So there is a big divide between what society and people think and what the investors are thinking. And I'm pretty sure you must be talking to both of them. You're talking to city, and you are also talking to some investor or VC fund which are looking future of mobility. What we are missing here, why there is a gap between what investors see and what public doesn't see or cannot see?
First, I think your let's say your comparison is slightly unfair to that point. If you restrict the investments to the term of mobility as a service, then the number is indeed relatively low. If you would have said shared mobility, right, then we are tracing investments into mobility startups since 2010, right? And you then see that across those ACEs trends on the very highest level, it's relatively balanced. So there's waves, right? But if you imagine how much money flew into those ride-hailing companies, into those mobility companies, or if you think that there is also shared mobility, right? So then the number is higher. But you are right. The investment into mobility as a service is low. Now, why is that? I think coming from both sides. I think from from the investment side, mobility as a service is not a, let's say, so it's not really a technological thing or question challenge anymore. The solutions are around, so there's companies offering that. It's more now the platform question. How do I attract now people on that service, and also having this environment we were talking about before, where you say mobility as a service makes sense because basically you need it to get from A to B. In a world where you still have, like most of the US cities, right, way more than 50% of person miles traveled being in a private car, mobility as a service doesn't make any sense. So I don't have any offering, right? I can book a scooter, okay, but I can also do that directly with the scooter company. So why do I now need mobility as a service? And in Europe, you often have the situation that I know that from quite some startups, the public transit organizations are typically not very, very open to share or to open up and basically become part of such a service. They want to basically do it on their own because they see their future also in that field. And so there's also the offering is just also not so the use of the services aren't great at the moment, and there's no easy unlock apart from a city would say, you know what, we all go car free, then out of the sudden you need it, right? You need it very, very urgently. And I think as long as this will not happen, it's for an investor, it's a difficult space. Now the customers, so now coming to your customer perspective, why do they like it? I mean, and I'm glad the people responded like that. When we ask consumers on that question, we see similarly openness of people. More than 50 people saying we're gonna use less the car going forward and more other modes of transport. So this openness for other mobility modes, and by that also for mobility as a service, is there clearly. And I mean, this is something where people see a true benefit in their daily lives, and that's why they like it. Now it's the unlock which we need now. I think, at least I believe, is the regulator. I think I truly believe that at least, I mean, we can wait for another 10 years, and then probably those ecosystems will be created also by themselves and by private players. But if we want to see an accelerated development where we see a stronger, let's say, push to new modes of transport or to those more denser and more sustainable modes of transport, I believe we need the regulator to push here and make it happen.
Yeah, no, I love your answer, and actually you're right. Because I do coordinate with a lot of VCs and all, and that's what they invest on. They invest in technology and product development. And in mass, the platforms are ready, technological solution is there. You just need a regulation now to do it, which VC doesn't want to play too much. They don't like to play with the regulation. They want to play with the product and launch some innovative product. Another sector, they are launching innovative products. So thanks for sharing this answer, Timo. I really love what the perspective you give. Now, this is my favorite topic, and I've also promised this is my last question. I know I took a lot of your time. You talk about metaverse in the beginning, and I'm very bullish about this whole blockchain and decentralized ledger system in mobility sector. What's your view on this Web3 and blockchain and metaverse thing? And one of the idea was coming to my mind because a lot of these brands are now getting active into the metaverse. Like you can buy some purse, you can buy some food in these metaverse and get delivered in the real world. And you also mentioned that people don't want to go to the dealers to buy a car anymore. That is shrinking. So probably we will see mobility companies selling car in metaverse, and you select, you drive, and you test in metaverse and get in real world. Do you think those use cases?
Yes, I do see those use cases, and I'm glad you mentioned the word use case. I mean, I mentioned with a smile in the face at the beginning, right? We don't need mobility anymore, maybe in a science fiction like world, because we just kind of stay at home and experience the whole world in the metaverse. I don't believe in this. What I do believe in is that those, let's say, metaverse technology, that we call them like that, right? So underlying technologies which are enabling the metaverse, and those is augmented reality and virtual reality in total. Those are blockchain technologies, etc. For those, let's say, underlying technologies and developments, there is a massive potential in the mobility space. And I mean, blockchain as an example, right? So we all want to know, I don't know, if we buy an e-bike, what's the CO2 footprint of this thing? How much child labor went into that? Hopefully none. How much water was used in production, etc. And there's many now. The bike is a relatively simple, let's say, component, but there you have already the battery in there, etc. So we need to trace a lot of those information throughout the whole value chain of such a product. And now think of that of a car, or think of that as think of my robo shuttle service, right? I also want to know all of that for this robo shuttle service. And there to kind of trace that information could be a nice, let's say, application for blockchain. Think of, you mentioned the sales process. This is also one of my favorites with augmented reality, right? I think you and I'm passionate about mobility, but I'm also passionate sometimes, at least, about new cars. And hey, you have the typical thing, right? You walk along the street, you see a car is parked, which you don't know yet, but you think it's looking quite nice, right? And then so today we then pull out our smartphones and start to Googling, what is that, right? Think of, hey, you have your AR glasses on, right? You can tell your bot, hey, what kind of car is that? And you get immediately connected to the sales rep, a virtual or even a real one, right? And you enter a conversation, quite a natural conversation about that car. You can then maybe start changing the color of the car, and the rims, whatever. And then you have, out of the sudden, your, let's say, dream car standing in front of you. And you just need to tell the bot, now I want to have a subscription for that for, I don't know, the next 3 months. So I'm making all of that a bit up, and there's probably optimization potential in that sales process. But this feels completely different than classically going into a dealership, which is really disruptive, right? I also need up my mind, where do I go? Then I don't have those cars standing around, which I'm really interested in. Neither it feels similar to how direct to consumer or direct sales looks like today, where you go to a, let's say, state-of-the-art configurator, and you do a couple of clicks here, and then you can buy it, like you, I don't know, buy groceries online or shoes. But there's also no really immersive experience with that product, which is not a shoe, right? So maybe there's people who are similarly impressed by sneakers, but I'm not. So I see a difference between shoes and cars.
Oh yeah.
So there's a difference in kind of complexity and how you want to experience that. And so those underlying metaverse technologies can enable a different experience in this sales process. So and the same you have in I don't know, in the production, in the plants, etc. I think there's quite some opportunity for those technologies along, again, the whole automotive value chain. I'm pretty excited as well about that.
Oh, great. Thanks for sharing a couple of these use cases. And I agree, is actually disturb the wholesale process and make it much more interactive and real time. You don't need to, like, sometime you have a thought in mind and you want to do it there rather than park it and visit your dealer on the weekend and some holidays, rather than you can do it quickly sitting in your desk and not only talk but experience and see and learn about the product then and there. No, thanks so much, Timo, for sharing your knowledge. We discuss about mobility
Sure.
and different technology trend, but I want to spend last 5 minutes and want to learn a little more about you. We have this rapid fire question round just to understand a little better about you and what you think about. So whenever you're ready, I'll start this rapid fire.
I'm ready.
Okay. So my first question is, and it will be interesting because you are in consulting space for more than 20 years. So if you're not in consulting space, what other profession you would have selected?
So spontaneous, I always had kind of the idea of running a restaurant.
Running a
For
restaurant.
whatever reason, I did that as a student job, right? In the service of a restaurant, not running a restaurant, but in the service of a restaurant, and I liked it quite a bit too. So this service mentality, right? So you get to meet interesting people, which you can talk to. So I like that, and then I like food as well. I mean, you shouldn't eat your own food always in the restaurant, but anyway. So for whatever reason, I still have I haven't given that up. This idea maybe later in my life to own and run a restaurant.
Retirement plan. In fact, I visited a restaurant recently. We spent 1 hour for eating food and spent 2 hours talking to the owner. So he was so loving guy and he wanted to talk to people. So I can imagine. So probably that's a retirement plan. Now you must have traveled so much given your job, and that's what you mentioned with the consulting firm. You get this opportunity to travel. Which is your favorite city in the world?
My favorite city of the world is the Alps. So I'm so obviously I come quite a bit around and need to meet people somewhere, and this is mostly in cities. But to be honest, I enjoy very much being in the countryside, and in my case specifically in the mountains. And the Alps are close on Europe, right? So that's why this is a bit my major destination. To be honest, I like to be more, or I like more to be in the countryside than I'm in the city.
Then we are friends, same. I love to go to, and that's what I said. I always look for a route which is more scenic and you see mountains and all. And I did a lot of trekking in Himalayas. So whenever you're planning to go to that side, let me know. I know good people who can take care of you and take you to the mountain and show you snow and all this kind of no, great. Now you work in a mobility sector, and I'm pretty sure whichever city you visit, you must check the mobility ecosystem in that city. So if I ask you, like, which city according to you has the best transit network in the world, or the best mobility system in the world?
Yeah, that's a different question, right? So mobility system versus transit system. So I'm always impressed by the Japanese public transit and rail system, specifically comparing it to the German one.
Yeah.
But I like to be, so that's on public transit. If you say mobility system, I enjoy actually those cities, and we have a couple of them in Europe, like Copenhagen, Amsterdam, where you have a high share of bicycles, and I think this more or less came naturally there and wasn't really planned through. But I enjoyed mostly the atmosphere, right? So there's just less cars, and this gives more space for trees and for cafes and just for people, and I also have the impression, not only the impression, we know by the fact that the traffic flow or the people flow of people is similar, if not even higher, in those cities where you have more bikes on the road. And so that's if you say best has very different dimensions, but for me, I appreciate those kind of cities most where you have a high bike share.
High bike share, so basically Amsterdam and Netherlands as a country.
Exactly.
That's a place.
Also Denmark, so Copenhagen has a very high share as well. And we are also improving in even in German cities like Cologne, right? Very many cities use the COVID situation where there were not so many people on the street in terms of cars on the street. They used it to replace, and we did that here in Cologne also, replace lanes of the street into bike lanes or by bike lanes. And now we are getting more and more bikes also across Germany. So we are moving in the right direction.
Many cities around the world took that opportunity to create bike lane during that period. So great to see that. Now, you work with startup and you must be meeting a lot of people in the space ecosystem and innovation ecosystem. Which is your favorite startup in the mobility sector?
That question is too difficult for me because there is so many impressive companies around there and really also really impressive entrepreneurs.
Right.
I'm classic, so and there's where my mechanical engineering background is coming a little bit through. I like to see still somehow a product, right? And so I have the opportunity to work for a gigafactory startup, right? A battery gigafactory startup. I have the opportunity to work for a startup who's reinventing the car and really trying to do something very, very differently with the car. So those are. I need to admit still I'm a hardware person somehow that I like to work with those, but we also have there's really cool sharing startups around there, connectivity startups who's making really the journey a more, let's say, beneficial journey for you. So there's cool there's plenty of startups, and I'm having the honor to be say in 2-3 startup competitions also active, and every year new ideas are coming, and I sometimes believe, hey, now we must have seen everything, right? But no, there's always kind of new stuff and more efficient motors. I don't know, a completely different way how to think car insurance. So there's always new stuff coming around, and I think those are still today the drivers of a lot of those developments. And it's in many areas it's not the incumbents, it's those kind of entrepreneurial and passionate guys and girls who are driving that.
No, I agree with you. Whenever you think, okay, you have done enough innovation, or now probably there is nothing coming next, and then suddenly you see something very innovative and new. So I agree with you. It's this world is becoming endless, and we are seeing more and more innovation, and people are very creative and finding solution. So this is my last question. I know we took a lot of your time, but if you can change one thing in life, what would it be?
It's simple. We just kind of press a button, right? And then we have this great new world, this great new mobility ecosystem across the world, which is way more sustainable, way more intelligent, uses less resources, which we have been talking about all the time. And we just make it by pressing a button and it's there. That would be my dream.
I wish we could. Next day morning, we'll wake up and we see a new world around us, and car-free world or more sustainable world. I don't hate car, but at the same time, I feel probably we can make it much more sustainable.
Agreed.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Timo. I mean, I took a lot of your time, but I learned really a lot during this discussion and some of your framework. I mean, I really imagine why you are in this space, why you are in consulting space, putting things perspective in a right perspective in a simple way. So thank you for giving your knowledge and feedback, and wish you good luck what you're doing.
Thanks again for having me and inviting me, and I can only play that back. It was a very interesting dialogue, and we are working in an exciting space, and there's still a lot of things to be done.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. We'll be inviting some other inspiring guests in the coming week. You can subscribe to this podcast online to get the notification for next episode. If you like this podcast, please don't forget to give us a 5-star rating. as it will help us to spread our message. If you have any feedback or suggestion for this podcast, please do write to us at info@mobility-innovators.com. I look forward to see you next time. Thank you.